Hey there, and welcome to That Bond Show, the internet's number one James Bond rewatch show hosted by two guys named Logan and Trevor. Probably. Join us as each week we dive through a new Bond movie from Dr. No to No Time to Die. I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
I've got an itch down there. Would you mind?
Yeah, that's a great pick for this week's selection. We are also joined yet again by special guest, Jarrett Green. Jarrett, how you doing?
I'm great.
Understated. I love it. Yeah. Yes, we are, of course, as Trevor alluded to with his fantastic line pick, talking about Casino Royale this week, the 21st James Bond film that was released November 14th of 2006. We all, I'm sure, have very strong memories of this one. Jarrett, kind of what were your memories of Casino Royale when it came out? What, 15 years ago now? 16 years ago?
Yeah,
Good
2006. It's like the year after I graduated. So I had gone away to college and then came back because it was too expensive and started a job to how I was going to figure this college shit out afterwards.
Right.
And I think it was one of the first big events that I remember like reconnecting with the people who would kind of be the group of my friends from now on to go see. Yeah. It's also the first like modern long movie I remember. Like this, I feel like that was when movies were like 2.5 hours again. Because I feel like there was a point where that's all they did, like old noirs and old westerns, and somewhere in the 80s they just kind of only made hour-and-a-half movies. Like action movies kind of defined that people just don't have the brain space to watch a movie longer than that, so that became like a very strict blocking for movies. And I feel like this is the first time that like they were like, fuck it, just do it, like who cares. And it was like post 9/11, so like it was very weird to see all these sort of old things kind of get reinterpreted as into like Matt Damon vision. Like everything got Bourne-inated after this.
Right.
And this was like the first time James Bond's got like the whole Bourne treatment.
Right.
So it was all very interesting.
Yeah. Trevor, what were your memories of Casino Royale coming out?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any like concrete, distinct memories. I definitely saw it. I might have seen it in theaters. I don't remember because I would have been like midway through college. I don't think I was with anyone at the time, so I don't think I was the kind of person that was really like going out and seeing movies like by myself then. I might have seen it with some friends, but like in the theater department or something like that. I don't remember any specifics around it, but I do remember like really enjoying it, really enjoying the like Bournification of it, as somebody who'd really liked kind of what that series had been doing in kind of the gap here. And yeah, like really enjoying kind of this new interpretation, this more serious version of the character that had, I think, for my taste, gotten a little like hokey with the Brosnan ones. And I certainly like would have, like by this point, I would have been a little bit more jaded about the Austin Powersification of Bond, and realizing like the bad elements of the series. So I appreciated this one kind of doing away with a lot of those, less stellar ideas. And yeah, I think this was just a real standout for the series of what I had seen up to this point.
Yeah, I would have been 14, right? So I would have just ended or been ready to start either my freshman or sophomore year of high school, right? So I was like prime going to the movie with friends age, right? And 2006 would have been pretty much like smack in the middle of like the most like fervent Bond period of my life, right? Which would have been from like World Is Not Enough, like into the 90s through like Skyfall, like that like kind of rough decade. And this is kind of right in the middle of it. I remember some of the earliest memories I have like looking at like message boards and like early internet sites like in the wake of Die Another Day in 2002 and like this 4-year gap between movies and like trying to suss out every kind of news you can find and like what's real, what isn't real. the reveal of Daniel Craig. Like, there was so much buildup for me as such a huge Bond fan in this moment, especially with my other favorite film series in Star Wars having some stumbles in the same time period. That, like, I kind of put more and more hopes on like this working. And then like this is one of those movies that like Dark Knight would come out 2 years after this, but like it's one of the same things where like I just remember so much of like the experience of watching the movie and like the friends I was with and like where was that in the theater, and just sitting there like gobsmacked at like what they did with Bond. And I came out of it a little like not sure what to make of it almost because it was such a different version of Bond than what I mean. I saw Die Another Day when I was 10, right? So like that's all I knew in the world of what James Bond was hokey Pierce Brosnan movies or really old school like Sean Connery stuff, right? And this is just so much different that it took a few years for me to, I think, really appreciate what this movie was doing. But yeah, I have very strong memories of Casino Royale.
I don't think I recognize or realize that there was a big controversy about Daniel
the casting.
Craig playing
Yeah,
Bond
it was a
until,
huge
like,
one
after this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, him being blonde-haired and blue-eyed.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. That didn't seem like a huge deal, but that's. Right. I don't know that I even recognized that that never happened before.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of that thing. Like I remember reading about it. I guess I'd have been like 13 in 2005 when he was announced, and me being like, "Huh, yeah, I guess it is true," kind of thing. And I'm someone who
like,
at
he
this
seems
point,
a little
like,
short, but like that doesn't seem like
right?
a problem. But like, no, that wasn't the problem.
Yeah, but yeah, as someone who like watches movies almost religiously back in this time period, like even I was like, all right, I guess he is blonde and blue-eyed and there's not been a Bond. We had an Australian Bond, no one was upset about that. So like, it's weird that this is gonna be the stumbling block here.
People were upset about it. There wasn't an internet at the time.
Yeah, it wasn't 2005 upset.
Yeah, that's I do remember that being like a controversy, but I feel like that was, I mean, like I wasn't like on forums and boards and stuff like that, but like my memories of the controversy were like late night talk shows talking about the fact that it was a blue-eyed, blonde-haired James Bond, and people were upset or something. Like it wasn't like Last Jedi levels of like tribal camps or anything like that.
Right.
But it also was still relatively earlier days in the internet, so yeah, it could have been.
It always strikes me as a similar thing to when Heath Ledger was named for like the Joker, right? And the same thing of like, or we could just watch the movie and see how it turns out, guys, because it might be good, you know, like kind of thing. We're like, this guy from The Patriot can't be the Joker.
It's weird that there's been like a Joker cast controversy every time. Like, who is the Joker ever been that he's been so monolithic that it couldn't be literally anyone?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how we got to this point where like everyone loves the cartoon Joker and everyone forgets that Luke Skywalker played that dude.
Right.
So he's not going to be the Joker in a movie. Right. He wouldn't look like the guy you remember. He might sound like the guy you remember. But do you really want Ben Affleck beating up old Luke Skywalker? Is that the movie you really want to see? Probably
it's also
not.
The Joker's such a funny one to me because part of what makes him fun, I think, is how elastic that character can be, right? Like we've got like Cesar Romero down to like Jared Leto and everyone in between doing different like interpretations of that character. Like the character is whatever.
Yeah, it's almost the point that he is not the same every time.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though he ironically ends up being the same every time.
Yeah, I think with that one it was like obviously Batman Begins had very much like changed the idea of what a Batman movie can be, from the 89 up through the Schumacher Batman movies, and so the idea of Heath Ledger, who was like Pretty Boy, 10 Things I Hate About You, like A Knight's Tale, stuff like he was not like. People were like, how is that going to jive with a darker version of this? And obviously, like, it jived very, very well. But yeah, that was I think, what people were responding to was, like, this guy is too pretty of an actor to be a twisted, dark character in this Nolan twisted, dark Batman universe that has been created. And obviously, like, the people were very, very wrong on that.
Yeah, it's just kind of hilarious that it's like this guy is too teen heartthrob Like, he's too teen vogue to be this character.
Yeah.
But there's been no sort of demonstration of the Joker being anything but sort of like a teen, like cartoon character at that point. Like even Jack Nicholson was kind of goofy.
Yeah.
Well, like that was the point. He was extremely goofy, actually. And Jack Nicholson playing an extremely goofy character was actually like the inverse of that whole sort of complex. Like how can the man in Chinatown be this guy?
Right.
They don't understand it. And then he would turn around and play some of the craziest things he'd probably ever do, like for the next 30 years, because Jack Nicholson's a maniac. But
yeah,
it's just funny how and the controversy over Bond, like it wasn't even that could Daniel Craig be a dude who is like a secret agent for English secret special services. It's like he looks like that when he does it, so we don't like that. It's not even that he couldn't even possibly do it. It's just like we just have to watch his face when he does it. We don't like any of that.
Yeah,
it's very like the idea of like casting against type,
right?
That like nowadays is increasingly less of a conversation, at least in like not non-racist forums and stuff. But like at the time it was, well, Ian Fleming described him as white with like brown hair or whatever, and so he must always be that. It's like, like if that's not integral to his character, he can also be something else.
Right.
Yeah.
At least this one's British, basically, I think was the...
exactly.
To be fair. This guy actually came from the country, so start there.
Speaking of running through the cast and crew, we of course have much talked about Daniel Craig as James Bond in his first appearance. This is a little bit of, bonus trivia. He's only the third actor to be in his 30s when he first portrayed James Bond, alongside even younger Sean Connery and baby-faced George Lazenby. We've got Eva Green as Vesper Lind, Mads Mikkelsen as Lashif. Again, in the first thing I always think of when I think of Mads Mikkelsen to this day is him in this movie.
What a career-making role,
right?
For Mads Mikkelsen.
That's definitely one, like, when I started seeing him...
Hannibal.
Yeah, when I started seeing him in other things later, and then, like, realizing that he was the bad guy from Casino Royale, I was like, oh, cool. He's been like, I've been enjoying him for many, many years, and I just hadn't really realized it.
He's such a good actor at playing villains. He's a great...
Yeah, I wonder how, like, I don't know what his range is, but I feel like he has a type of thing he does, and he does it very, very well.
Very well, yeah. We've got Juan Carlo Gianni as Mathis, Jesper Christensen as Mr. White, Jeffrey Wright bringing back Felix Leiter after a 15-year absence here, Tobias Menzies as Valers, and Judi Dench returning yet again as M. This would be the second Bond film directed by Martin Campbell after GoldenEye, which, in case you're wondering, does in fact put him at the best batting average of any Bond director. I'll go ahead and assure you of that. In the Blast from the Past section, the president was still George W. Bush. Tony Blair was the prime minister still. Trevor was 21 years old. I was 14. Jarrett, you would have been, what, 20, 19?
20. 19.
19. And the highest grossing movie of the year was Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. What a time 2006
that movie was okay.
The 2.5 hour trailer for the third movie.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. That movie was okay. Is a great way to describe it. I had thought, like, I remember, like, having really strong movies being like, that movie was awesome. I loved that movie. Probably because I was 14 when it came out. And then I watched it again during the pandemic when we did a Pirates watch long, and I was like, oh wow, this movie is, you know what it is more than anything else? Long. It's real long. And
it's super long and no one remembers anything from it.
You feel how long it is about 40 minutes into it, and you're like, oh shit, there's still 2 hours left of this. Lit, guys. Yeah, it is a very long movie.
Took all the wrong lessons from the first one.
It did. Sure did. In the trivia section, Ion Productions had gained the rights to Casino Royale in 1999 after Sony Pictures exchanged them for MGM's rights to Spider-Man, in a rare deal that worked out great for both parties. Even more fun, extra trivia for you, Sony would then go on to buy the rights to Bond and distribute it, starting with Casino Royale. So they kind of got the best of both worlds there. Pierce Brosnan's time as James Bond had been enormously successful, helping to reinvent the character for a modern audience and becoming the face of the character through his time in film and games. Each of his 4 films stood as the 4 highest-grossing Bond movies ever when unadjusted for inflation, and he had expressed strong desire to come back and make a 5th and final Bond movie. Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, the longtime Bond producers, had other ideas, though. Despite the massive box office success of the Brosnan era, the two were particularly sensitive to claims that the success had grown too fantastical and over the top, which, again, as always, is completely ridiculous, because nothing from the Brosnan era came close to Moonraker, but I digress. They knew they wanted to bring things back down to earth, but weren't sure in how. At this time, the idea to finally bring Ian Fleming's first James Bond novel, Casino Royale, to the big screen began to gain steam. Ultimately, despite assurances he'd be back, Brosnan got a phone call informing him the series would be going in a different direction and rebooting with Daniel Craig cast instead. Nearly 20 years on from the 2004 announcement of his departure for the series, it's fairly obvious Brosnan feels slighted and a bit cheated. It's a cruel business is a refrain you hear from him a lot. I watched a lot of Pierce Brosnan interviews in the wake of doing this podcast series, and pretty much every one of them, anytime someone asks him about ending his time as James Bond, he immediately looks like he wants to just like throw something at the interviewer. He very clearly is still a little sensitive about it, I would say.
It's very like Bret Hart versus the WWE for like
sort of. That's a great analogy. Before he came back,
he's just like every time anyone could even like hit towards the direction of, so how do you feel about fuck them.
It's a very, and it's weird too, because we've talked about this when we did his movies, that Pierce Brosnan is really the only person who like grew up loving the James Bond film series who has become James Bond, right? Like Timothy Dalton didn't give a fuck. He's a Shakespearean actor. Sean Connery obviously like made it, so he doesn't count. George Lazenby just wanted to get rich. Roger Moore also didn't care. And Daniel Craig had no sort of like prior allegiance to the series. He wasn't a fan growing up. So like Pierce Brosnan's the one who like loved this character as a kid, and then he got to be James Bond. And so like I think there's also a sense of like he felt like he was Charlie and Willy Wonka's in the Chocolate Factory, and he actually had to like take over the factory for like a year, and then they were like, actually, we found a better kid than you. He just was a little late getting his golden ticket, so we're gonna kind of kick you out of here. Definitely some hurt feelings, I think. On Daniel Craig's side of things, again, as we mentioned a lot, the internet flipped out about his blue-haired, blonde-eyed, slightly short actor being cast as James Bond, but everyone shut the hell up after the film came out. Henry Cavill, meanwhile, was the runner-up to Daniel Craig as James Bond, but at just 22 years old, was deemed a little too young to play Bond by Martin Campbell. I think that was probably a correct decision.
Whatever happened to that Henry Cavill guy?
It is funny, though, that when you see, like, you know, like the bookie odds of who the next Bond is going to be, Henry Cavill's a frequent.
So it might just actually be him anyway.
Right, he's a frequent pick.
I mean, that seems to be the trend that they've done. So
yeah, that's true. Jarrett wasn't here for this. Where like every actor who was James Bond, with the exception of Daniel Craig, was almost cast as James Bond beforehand.
Oh, Roger Moore was did almost the from the same shortlist, like the entire series.
It was almost Roger Moore for the first one, and then it was Timothy Dalton was supposed to replace Connery, but he was too young, and then Brosnan was supposed to play Moore, but obviously Remington Steele and NBC fucked him in the ass on that one, and then it was Daniel Craig now, and maybe Henry Cavill. At 144 minutes, the movie broke On Her Majesty's Secret Service 37-year record to become the new longest Bond film. It would not hold the record for that long, as Jarrett kind of alluded to.
Because every Bond movie was like, what if we were longer?
Yeah, basically only one of Daniel Craig's movies, the very immediate follow-up, Quantum of Solace, is going to be less than 2 hours long. The rest are all 2 hours and then some, all the way up until No Time to Die, trying to get to 3 hours. Several elements of the Bond mythos are slowly revealed in the film, from Bond winning the iconic DB5 in a card game, to Vesper buying him a perfectly Bond suit, to, of course, Mathis introducing himself, last name, then first name, Mathis, Rene Mathis. The movie was nominated for a series record 9 BAFTA awards. It would win 1 for Best Sound, but still, it's a nice little sensation.
That is something I do remember about that movie, though. Like, great sound design.
Yeah. It still holds up, too. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Finally, Casino Royale was, of course, a massive sensation, shattering box office records for the series, setting new marks for the best opening day, opening weekend, and total box office grosses, both in the UK and US. It was the highest grossing film in the UK for the year, the fourth highest grossing film worldwide, behind Pirates of the Caribbean, and the highest grossing movie ever for the series, ultimately taking in over $600 million at the box office. It would settle as the 10th highest grossing film ever in the UK at its release, and even when adjusted for inflation, Casino Royale was still a smash success, placing behind only 3 Connery-era films, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and Thunderball. Critically, the film was arguably even more successful. It is tied for the second highest rated Bond film on Rotten Tomatoes, alongside Dr. No and From Russia with Love, and behind only Goldfinger. It appeared on over a dozen different outlet lists for the best films of the year, would be named one of the 20 best films of the past 25 years by EW, would appear in Empire and The Guardian's best of lists, and would shoot near or at the top of numerous James Bond rankings lists since its release. It unquestionably, upon release, was the most critically acclaimed movie in the series since at least The Spy Who Loved Me, if not the Connery era. People really liked it, turns out. That takes us to the 0070-second recap here. I clocked in about like a minute 40, Trev. So that's sort of what I'm kind of pegging it to be.
That's about what I was going to guess, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Fantastic. So let's pull it up.
It's a long one.
It's not too long. It just usually, well, I don't know who the hell knows.
I mean, when I read it earlier, I was like, this is a long one. At a minute 40, that's on the longer side of these things.
Bond earns his 00 status with 2 kills, one of brutal fashion and one delivered coolly. To celebrate, he engages in a brilliant parkour-inspired chase, blows up an embassy, and heads to the Bahamas. M scolds him, Bond wins his Aston Martin DB5 in a game of poker, stops a bond maker in Miami, and learns of the chief and a multi-million-dollar card game he's holding in Europe. M gets him in, and Bond is introduced to the money herself, Vesper. The two don't play very well. Renee Mathis, is shown to be the man in town, and the card games begin. Bond almost dies a couple different times while taking card breaks, and Vesper is distraught at a brutal killing right in front of her, after which she and James seem to finally connect. Bond is poisoned, gets knocked out of the game, buys back in with some help from old new friend Felix, and eventually gets in a 4-player all-in situation that sees him win the game. Vesper is taken, Bond chases after and destroys his car, and James is subjected to a truly gruesome torture by the chief, who does in fact die itching James's balls. Mr. White shows up and kills the chief, and we and James come to in a hospital. Bond wrongly blames Mathis for the double cross, and James and Vesper fall in love and have a wonderful series of scenes together. Bond offers his resignation from MI6, but Vesper takes the money and gives it to a mysterious man. James kills everyone, destroys a building, and tries to save Vesper, but she drowns herself. James is emotionally devastated and very angry, spoilers for the sequel, will stay angry, and talks to M, where he learns of Vesper's background and sacrifice to save him. Finally, Bond introduces himself to Mr. White.
Yep,
Trev?
141.
Bang on the money, almost like I've done this 21 times now. Trevor, how many were killed?
So the final tally for this one, as per our usual source, alloutofbubblegum.com, comes in at 26, half of which 13 are killed by James Bond himself. So how many of those, Logan, are named killers? I gave you the tease ahead of time that these movies are going to start trying to fuck you because they name almost all the characters, even if they don't actually say the characters' names on screen. So
right, yeah, we're in the era of lore now, right? So everyone gets a name.
This is the wiki era.
Exactly. So I'm gonna err on the side of caution. So like most people I can think of. So like I think of like the 2 kills he earns. I'm gonna go ahead and say both have names. I know the one guy does, but I'm gonna assume the other guy he beats the shit out of in the bathroom also has a name. Probably something stupid. Then he kills the bomb maker. I'm sure the bomb maker has a name. He kills Demetrios, who's the first guy whose name I remember. Then he doesn't kill the chief. He doesn't kill Mr. White. He doesn't kill the chief's henchman or girlfriend. They both just escape. Ooh, this is gonna. He kills 13 people. But how many are named? Like, I feel like the guys at the like.
Does the guy in the hallway have a name in the stairwell?
Ooh, yes, like the African warlord dude. I'm sure has some name. Of probably questionable status, right? So like that's 5, and then I'm gonna say like the eyeglass wearing dude with like the weird patch thing is 6. So I'm gonna say he kills 6 dudes with names. You know what? I'll play it safe. I'll go 7 because I'll say the African warlord's like assistant dude also has a name. So I'm gonna say 7 guys out of the 13 are named.
Okay. So the kills are Dryden and Fisher are his 2 kills for 00. Dryden is the station manager that he's relating the story to. Fisher is the guy he brutally takes out and then shoots in the like Bond shooting pose. Malaka is the bomb maker. Demetrios. Carlos, the second bomber that you did not identify, he blows him up, obviously.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I was actually thinking of him, but not the first one at the embassy. You're right.
Yeah. Obano is the warlord. Obano's bodyguard is one of his other kills, but does not have a name.
So I'm still doing okay.
Gettler is the eye guy that he shoots with the nail gun, and as he is the one who shoots the guards, causing the building to flood, he gets a shared kill with Vesper killing herself in the elevator. So Vesper is the 8th kill of his. So 8 total.
That's questionable, the Vesper one, but
8 total named kills. Yeah,
I think I feel like that's whatever. Vesper is a questionable one.
He did sink a building on her.
Yeah,
sure, but he tried to save her. She killed herself. But I'll allow it. Right, we'll play by the whatever rules. But like that one's kind of silly. But yeah, I knew it was gonna be some crazy high number like that. Yeah, that's
like pretty much all of the the 5 unnamed kills are
like guards,
the bodyguard, Albano's bodyguard, the warlord's bodyguard, and then the 4 guys he kills in that fight in the building. Yeah, he shoots one in the neck. He kills one of them with like a wooden plank. He causes the elevator to fall on one of the guys, crushing them, and then he electrocutes somebody with a live wire. And then shoots Gettler with the nail gun. And we do like Gettler. I watched it a second time last night, and Gettler, at least, while not said anywhere, is named because we see his name in like the text to and from from Vesper. We see like that's the name on the phone.
That despite killing 13 people, which some might call a lot, this very much felt like the fewest Bond kills we'd had in 30 years, right? And like maybe it's just also because like each of these kills is so much more personal versus like in Tomorrow Never Dies where he blows up an arms bazaar, right? And so it's like, well, there are like 100 dudes, right? So it's like much more chill than that. But like, yeah, it felt like he kind of had to earn all of his kills.
There is an unconfirmed and uncounted section of he might have killed more people when he blew up the embassy, but I think
the guards got back up.
Yeah. The news report like only identifies one unarmed person as which would be the bomb maker.
And it does make a distinct sort of intentional choice to show people recovering from the explosion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which is like not how action movies work. Usually the thing blows up and the guy gets away in new sequence. And they're like, well, he didn't kill everyone. So it's a little more realistic, I guess.
There were a lot of those, like seeing like even earlier in that parkour like sequence, the bomb maker kind of like throws other people off the building, causing like an explosion down below or whatever. And there are a couple times where like we see other people still like fleeing the scene as like in the background we see the chase between Bond and the bomb maker continuing along and stuff like that. So yeah, they did that. There were a few times where I was like, oh, it's cool that they're showing like some of these extra little details that like I wouldn't have otherwise expected to see.
Jarrett, give me your quick thoughts on Casino Royale.
Well, I always liked the book. I think there's an interesting, and they don't really do a whole lot of like explicit talking about Bond up to this point. They don't really tell you where he came from and why he's this way. They kind of mentioned that he was in a war, and now he works for the Secret Service, and he maybe didn't completely recover from whatever he was doing then, but that kind of attitude made him perfect for what he does now. And I think that has always been a overarching theme of the books, at least the first like 6, where the Bond that Ian Fleming wrote is a guy who lives in all these places at once. He kind of lives in his past and also tries to be the suave guy right now, and is always thinking about like what the future of that guy he's trying to be is, because it's the space where he can exist is kind of running out. So he tries to always be a guy who lives in the present, but he really can't. This is the closest they get to that, I think, before Skyfall, maybe, where they make an explicit sort of conversation about how he got here and who he was before. And I think framing it, it's not a period piece. It was like, we're supposed to assume like mid 2000s. So it isn't the war he was in wasn't World War II.
Right.
It was one of the many desert wars, probably. Even if it wasn't the ones we were in at the time, it could have been any of the ones before that. So his sort of, the impression he took from it is something that you could probably maybe not relate to directly, but like he is a modern sort of effect, or a modern consequence of things that happen in our lifetime. Not just the character and his sort of perception of the character, but also everything around him. The bomb maker is doing parkour. A bomb maker would not be doing parkour in any of these previous movies. He'd be a guy in a lockbox with some guards in front of him.
I mean, one of my direct notes was Bond parkour chasing. This isn't your grandfather's Bond.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, George Lazenby is not jumping from skyscraper to skyscraper to chase a man. And even kind of watching him have to deal with recognizing that he really can't just kill this guy. He really wants to, but he really can't. So he has to do all this hard work to eventually not get him anyway. And that's like a reoccurring theme in Daniel Craig's Bond. I mean, not in Quantum where he just kills everybody, but
everyone.
he has to become a person. He's struggling a lot with being like a law enforcement officer. Yeah. And like, really, what is he doing? Like, why is he doing it? Is the overarching story in Casino Royale, and I always found that to be the most interesting part of it. There's also like great, just classic action movie shit. And like the poker scene is obviously iconic. Yeah. I think Eva Green created like a genre of English white lady that has just persisted forever now. Like, reached back in time from like Bathory and just made her a movie star, basically. Like, there's just so much about that movie, I think, that like that there's a genre of action that like directly owes everything to it. And which is funny because Bond kind of owes a lot to a lot of other action around it. So it's really cool to watch like the links of the chain sort of follow through. Yeah. That's a movie that's going to hold up probably forever. If none of the other Bond movies do, I think this is the one that, like, as far as bigger than the series goes, I think Casino Royale is like a good one.
Trevor, quick thoughts.
After 20 weeks of doing this show, jumping into Casino Royale, like, I knew it was going to be like a highlight. And I was like amazed by how much I enjoyed this, because I have probably only watched it, like, I've probably only watched it a couple times before this. It's definitely not as burned in my brain as like GoldenEye was or something like that. But this one, the only thing I think that like shows its age in this, as I mentioned to you in our Slack kind of after I was watching it the first time, is all of the like, we're just before smartphones become the dominant technology, and so flip phone, flip phones, and so much of the like detective plot of like trying to follow the clues and figure out where to go is built around that. So like that shows the age of this in the same way that like that first Iron Man seems very weird with Tony Stark pulling out flip phones and talking about MySpace and stuff. But other than that, like, everything in this movie I think is still stellar and holds up 15, 16 years later in incredible ways, and in phenomenal like action and storytelling as well. There are a couple moments like on a rewatch in the casino scene that I don't think they trust the audience enough to follow what's going on in the poker game. So you have what's his name in there, kind of like say you have Mathis,
Mathis, like,
yeah, Mathis in there being like, it's his tell, Bond was right, or like explaining, Bond needs to go all in for this, or what. Like, there are a few moments there where I'm like, I mean, like, Texas Hold'em was a very big thing at this time, guys. I think people probably understand how poker is played, or like the movie has done a good enough job setting up these elements that you don't need to spell it out as precisely. But I also understand needing to spell things out for American audiences and stuff. But yeah, like, so much of this movie just is stellar. I love Eva Green as Vesper Lynn. I think she is a stellar, phenomenal performance, who much like Denise Richards a couple weeks ago, doesn't come in until like the hour mark of the movie.
Minutes in the movie, yeah.
But like immediately makes her presence known. To what you were saying, Jarrett, like, I love the back and forth and the sizing each other up scene that they have, that does kind of allude to and go into Bond's like orphan past, and kind of like he, the idea that he is uncomfortable in, well-mannered society, which continues to play out where like he does not want to go in this tux, but ends up wearing the hell out of it. I love her. And then as like, and I probably didn't piece this together, didn't think about this in this context, but like the fact that like she gets so under Bond's skin and leads to the very cold, detached Bond that we get at the end of this film, who doesn't trust anybody, as M kind of points out. Like, she is the reason that this version of James Bond doesn't trust people. It's because the person that he tried to trust, like, he like betrayed him in the worst possible way, and he doesn't really get closure on that ever. Obviously up through like No Time to Die, I guess. Yeah, but
yeah. And in a way, he understands, and like,
yeah,
the idea that he can't really like make her the same sort of enemy he makes all of the other enemies for the rest of the series is like a whole complex too. Like, he can't just kind of throw her away with the other people he shoots, because he understands that in her last moment she did do it for him, even though she got them in this situation in the first place.
Yeah. Mads Mikkelsen as Le Chiffre is great, and like a cool throwback to like the like Bond villain with like a horrible scar or some kind of like defect, but also just like very menacing in and of its own right. So shout out to all of that. Lots of great action. I like that it also, like, I mean, even something as simple as like the illusion that Le Chiffre was maybe behind 9/11 too, tying it into like the very real world stakes and scenarios that obviously we had now been living with for a few years, I think is an interesting little wrinkle in the film as well. But yeah, just lots of good stuff in this one for me.
I agree, right? I think kind of before we kind of run through the story and kind of the big beats there, like, one of the things I wanted to say too is that like it is so refreshing to see Vesper, right? Because I think with what the Daniel Craig series is going to do, and like some of which I really love and some of which I really don't like, it's just nice to be like, all right, yeah, like, she is awesome. Like, she is just a fantastic character that just like immediately hits it off, right? Like, it is so good, their chemistry, and she is so like brilliant in every scene. I think partially because the series kind of kept trying to get away from her, but like never really could. And like my favorite of Daniel Craig's movies is gonna be the one where like there's just no reference to her at all in Skyfall, and I think it's sort of nice because of that, right? Where I think the other ones, where they try to like tie it in like the last two films in the series, it can get a little just like convoluted and messy. But she's so great here as just like a figure and a person who's alive, and
it's almost like she's a specter over the course of the rest of the series.
Ba-da-da-da, right? Like, look at the camera. It's and so we'll get to Spectre, don't worry. And so I think here, though, she's so brilliant and so fantastic. I love the fact that like Le Chiffre is such an atypical Bond villain, right? Like, he's not really he's not a big bad. Like, he's in so many ways just like a henchman who they gave the entire movie to, and it's so different and such a cool idea, right? And I love the fact that he isn't Goldfinger or Alex Trevelyan or Mr. Big or Name Your Bond villain, right? Like he is just kind of like the side character they would have that Bond would knock out midway through the film. And to be fair, Bond does knock this guy out with like 30 minutes of the movie left still, right? Like, and like that's such a cool idea. I love the fact that Bond doesn't kill him, right? Like I think there's a lot of cool dynamics there. The one big thing though I want to talk about before we kind of run through the movie itself is just to Trevor's point about the poker sequence. I would much prefer what they do here and kind of really holding your hand while walking you through Texas Hold'em, as opposed to the 40 years of them playing Baccarat, me being like, I have no idea what the hell is going on in this game. Like, I watched movies for 25 years. I have no idea what that game is still. Like, I'd much rather have, like, too much information to me and too much of them being like, there's the tell, there's the, like, all in, there's, like, the flop kind of thing, than, like, I don't know how this game works for 25 years.
Yeah, I get that. I would argue, though, that, like, Baccarat has never been, like, as important or as crucial to the story in any of the Bond films as the poker game is
Texas
in
Hold'em.
this one.
Well, I would argue in the book they play Baccarat instead of Texas Hold'em.
They updated it, yeah.
They go into pretty good detail about how they're playing, like the hands and
I would hope.
what Bond thinks, because he plays Baccarat multiple times in that book. In the same way he plays Hold'em, in the beach house, but they don't do any work in the book to explain like what any of this means. It just like it's good and Bond is happy.
You have to know this, obviously.
But I think the assumption is in 62 or whatever that everyone kind of knew how to play Baccarat. Or if you were reading this book, you probably knew how to play Baccarat.
You knew how to play it, yeah.
And I know, and if you were probably watching a Bond movie, back then, you probably knew how to play Baccarat. I think the assumption here is that so many people might be watching this for so many different reasons. Mm-hmm. That you might look that anyone could watch a hand of Hold'em and you can't assume that person knows that. But and even though you maybe should, or even if you shouldn't, maybe the way to have exposition about it isn't literally a dude telling you about it.
Yeah,
hand by hand by hand behind it, and in a whisper. Maybe that's not how that should work either.
Yeah, like I never have a problem when the dealer is basically saying like, this person has the high hand. Oh, now this person has the high hand, and like that's all fine and like is needed to and would be like appropriate for the stakes of the table kind of thing. But yeah, it's the very like Mathis kind of commentary to Vesper, as if like she doesn't know or something. Even the idea like Vesper introduces like the idea of bluffing on the train, and Bond's like, oh, so you know the term. It's like, who doesn't know what a bluff is?
Yeah,
like that's just common vernacular, my guy. But I also want to, veering away from that, I also, of course, want to give a shout out to, I think this is easily the best Bond M dynamic we've ever had, above and beyond what Judi Dench was kind of given in the Brosnan era. From their first scene together, where Bond has broken into her house, is just like great, and she's throwing stuff back in her face. It's the first conversation she had with Brosnan of, I think you're a relic from from the Cold War
sexist, misogynist
kind of
dinosaur,
thing. Yeah,
right?
like you are like it's that like antagonism between the two of them almost, but drawn out over the course of a scene or of the film. And obviously this is a different flavor of Bond, so it's not that kind of thing when she's being much more of a like boss and trying to navigate him through his rookie year of being a 00. And I love that dynamic and relationship that the two of them have. And also just the idea of like, how the hell does he know all these things about me?
It's great.
And there's a little bit of an irony in M being so explicit in sort of pinning Bond as the Bond we kind of assume he is up until that point, based on like the history of the character as like the misogynist relic, to only really never. I mean, they sort of address that in this movie directly. Part of that in this movie directly, like he's not putting women over his knee and spanking them or some crazy shit. He's not completely ridiculous like some of these old Bonds are. But they never really. It takes the series a long time to really address like the fridging of the women who become characters, and like
Hmm.
making them real people outside of M and outside of, I mean, even Vesper, the most character Vesper has is when she's dead for the next 4 movies after this.
Yeah.
And everyone remarks on how great she is alive, and because she is, but they spend so much time making that mean something that it means nothing, or it means the wrong thing. And then especially in the second movie, like they're like, if you live, you're just dead. And if you were an accessory to him in some way, like a woman like a person he met at night, like, at a bar, would then just become something to get killed and send him on a rampage. Like, it's funny that they make an explicit sort of mention in the actual material to address that we're not going to be that guy, but then they kind of forget the other part where they maybe should make these characters better than a person that guy would exploit anyway. And I think obviously the Craig Bonds are better at this than probably every other Bond, but it still drops plenty of balls itself.
Yeah, it's interesting. Trevor's never seen Quantum of Solace, and I'm very excited to watch it with him. It's such a tonal shift from like the kind of like understated.
I think I wouldn't say it's bad. I
don't think it's
I
bad
think Quantum's
either.
a movie I kind of end up liking more after I rewatched it.
I agree. It's very different than this though.
But yeah, you watch this movie and you're like, man, where's this gonna go? And then it goes there, and you're like, what the fuck happened?
It's just fucking Mad Max for 90
yeah,
minutes.
really.
But kind of running through Casino Royale, right? Like even starting with the opening of the movie, right? Like I think this has one of my personal favorite pre-title sequences of the entire series, right? Like it's a super short one, right? Like we're not doing a 25-minute pre-title sequence like No Time to Die will do. It's like a 2.5 minute long one that sets up who this character is, what he's about to kind of become, the fact that he's not a 00 agent yet for the first time in the series. And I think the entire exchange between him and the station chief with those kind of quick cuts to the like bathroom fight is so perfectly done. And I know some people might not like it, but I love the fact that it's all filmed in black and white as well. I think it is like perfect for that. And then that kind of shift you get when it cuts to the gun barrel sequence being used for the first time.
Yeah, even the MGM logo being in black and white like come into the film is like this it gives this cool noir vibe to like relaying this information of like, yeah, it is the beginning of the James Bond story, and I like the idea that like it adds this mythos of like you need 2 kills to be a 00, and we get to see who those 2 kills are for this James Bond. And they're cocky, but he's got the one up on them. And I like even to the point that the guy's like, well, your second one's and like doesn't even get to get out how the second one is easier, and Bond just says, yes, I know, and like kills him right off the bat. So yeah,
and the actual like the framing of the shot, it's very,
yes, that's what I was gonna talk about.
2/3 he's cloaked in shadow. Bond is literally wearing like a high collar trench coat, like a gumshoe.
Yep.
I don't know why. Like it's cool, and I'm glad it happened, but I don't know what, like, this is referencing a thing Bond never was, so it's very interesting that this is what we chose to sort of imply.
It's great there, yeah. Like I think to me it evokes like 1950s and 60s kind of like espionage
like
stories. I think it's sort of like that throwback to like what Bond originally was as a character in Fleming's novels, and even like kind of the early Connery movies, right? And so like I think it's just kind of like a nice homage to that. And like the way that so much of the like station chief office is like framed and shot, right? Like the low angles and the high angle shots are like kind of cut back and forth, the like rapid cut in between it, like it is all framed so well and like so perfect. And one of the big things that I really noticed on this most recent rewatch of Casino Royale that I'll kind of mention a few different times throughout the pod is that like how selective and sparingly this movie uses dialogue, right? Like I think this has some of the best writing and dialogue in the entire series, which is not necessarily a high bar at times, but in certain movies it is. And this movie will go like long stretches with like no one saying anything, just like action. Like that entire parkour chase sequence is just like no dialogue, right? And then you get these really meaty scenes of like characters going back and forth and sparring with Bond and Vesper kind of multiple times, or Bond and M. And like, I just think even that opening sequence, like every word they're using is there for a purpose, and there's nothing superfluous to it. The sequence itself is not any second longer than it needs to be. Like, it's just super crisp, super tight, and then boom, we're into the credits. And it's also the first Bond movie that doesn't have naked women in it since like Doctor No. So it's also like a very change of pace, kind of tonal shift from that as well.
I looked it up. I wonder if they saw how big and how successful Sin City was the year before, and were like, yeah, let's just do a black and white opening.
Right.
Yeah, you know what? That probably makes a lot of sense.
They shot the thing in color, and then Sin City did really well, and they were like, well, let's try this. Let's turn this filter on. Hey, that actually looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and keep
the IG filter, and they're like, okay.
And so yeah, then after the pre-title sequence, we cut. Obviously, we all have mentioned it. It's the parkour chase. I think is just like such an awesome action set piece, right? Like I think
right before it is really cool too, though. It's because it's him and like other rookie bro, like kind of staking out, and rookie bro's got his finger on his ear, like a giant asshole.
Yeah.
Even before that, we get
fucking Viper mongoose pit.
Like, yeah, even before we get to that next Bond scene, we like the first thing after the credits is the introduction of Lashif as the money man for the Ugandan warlord guy, in a cool little introduction scene, that sets the stakes for those characters, I guess, that will come back into play later. And it's like
Mr. White.
It's yeah, and the introduction of Mr. White. So like that's an interesting like feel of like getting to see things from that perspective. I feel like that's not a thing we've done all that often in the Bond series. Like we did, like it was
it's a more modern
a kind of element
film.
of GoldenEye and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely a modern filmmaking kind of thing of let's show some scenes from the villain's perspective, and then we'll circle back around to Bond to put them a little bit more on even footing. But yeah, I love the stop touching your ear sequence as well.
It's so funny, right? And then like I love that sequence too, Jarrett, just for when the bomb maker does start running, like Bond just like holding steady for a second and then just like turning and like sprinting after him, right? Like just like how
and like draws his gun and you're like, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Are you the other guy draws his gun and he's like, don't draw your gun, and you start to reckon that like Bond's the adult here and that's awkward. That feels weird.
Yeah.
Like he's telling someone to restrain themselves, this is not the guy who does that really. And right. During the next, 10 minutes of the scene, you watch him have to kind of restrain himself multiple times. So he's not just this guy's boss. He has to like be his own boss, like in the moment as well.
But only restrain himself to a certain degree, right? Like one of my favorite moments, I think, of the entire Daniel Craig era is him just fucking linebackering through a wall of drywall, just fucking smashing through like the Kool-Aid Man. Like, it's such an awesome shot. Like the fact, he's all brute force and no like style like the bomb maker.
The bomb maker is doing like legit parkour amazingness stuff, and Bond is like doing the things that he can do, and when he can't do the thing, when he can't like do that crazy high jump to slide through a top window, he just plows through the wall.
Which is a great sort of touch of personality. He doesn't have to say anything for you to learn that he's the kind of guy that will run through a wall if he has to. Instead of like making him sound like the kind of dude that would write some shitty dialogue and make it feel like just let him do that actually.
Yeah. I mean, it's very evocative to me of, again, Trevor already mentioned, but like the GoldenEye scene between Brosnan's Bond and M, where like she calls him like a blunt instrument, right? And like it's very much just like, I'm just gonna fucking smash through a wall, blow up shit, destroy an embassy, whatever, and just walk in and just smash it around in order to get my man, right? Like that's what my kind of job here is.
He does blow an embassy up after.
He does. He straight up blows an embassy up.
He goes in. He's like, he sees the guy go into the embassy. And he's like, well, and the guy believes like he's good now because this is international territory. And this cop wouldn't start an international incident just for little old man. Wrong. Yeah. Like wrongest of wrong.
Yeah.
He goes in and thinks he's gonna get out quickly by snatching this dude up. This dude's super surprised this would ever happen. And he almost does get out with this guy, and then doesn't. Gets surrounded by like 30 guards with guns. Just blows the place up anyway.
And bounces, right? And I love that it then goes to M walking out of like some sort of like very clear like parliament panel thing and just being like, God, I miss the Cold War, right? Like, who the hell do they think they are, like talking to me like that kind of thing? Like, it is such a great like kind of transition and cuts, right? And then you have, as Trevor said, like Bond breaking into M's like home is like always one of my favorite sequences in the movie. Like, I think
I should have you shot.
it's such a funny sequence. It's such a funny back and forth, right? That like sets up another great joke about Bond, like hacking into her password and like getting her account kind of info and how he knows everything. Like, it's just, yeah, Bond and M's chemistry throughout the movie, I think, is just like fantastic.
I think it's also fascinating because I it wasn't until like I was taking notes on my second watch where I was like, oh, like, yeah, obviously like this Bond doesn't have a Q, but Bond is doing all of the Q things. Like all of the hacking and like digging into the phone is stuff that other, like in past, would have gone to Q branch and they would have, done the research and figured out what, like where he needed to go next and stuff. So the fact that like he's doing that and he is kind of his own Q branch, I think is also a cool approach for a modern 21st century Bond, that like it's not necessarily gadgets, but it's still like you need to be very technologically savvy to figure out how to jailbreak a phone and go in and figure out like the GPS coordinates of where these texts came from and stuff like that. And I think it's another element that is being shown to us not through dialogue. It is just we're seeing him do these things and put these pieces together in a much more like cool and interesting way. And I think it makes him that much more capable of a Bond that doesn't need a Q branch to kind of help back him up in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. And then in terms of the casino sequences itself that Jarrett kind of obviously touched on, I mean, it is in so many ways like the heart of the movie. Obviously, is like that whole act in the casino with Bond and Vesper, Bond and Lashif, the multiple attempts at him getting killed. Right, like I always love as like a personal favorite, like him trying to do the defibrillator and like just seeing it's not plugged in and just like the soft like chuckle he gives as he like passes out, like feels very Daniel Craig James Bond in a way that I really love.
He has a lot of those like very like smirk moments. Like he knows when a thing is funny, but he doesn't like he plays it still cool. I love like when he blows up the guy who tried to blow up the plane. Like he's there being like restrained by the cops or whatever, and he looks up, sees the guy try to detonate the thing, and just kind of has like a little
pieces.
a little smirk to himself, knowing that he had that one.
And there's like there's kind of like a line of sort of tragic comedy that kind of Bond pulls through everything he does, and it's kind of funny that like you say, he doesn't know that to have a belly laugh at it, but it's funny to him, and it's only funny in his particular circumstance. That's a tragedy to anybody else.
Or
it's the life of a double O, right?
Him seducing Demetrius's wife and being like with his own car, basically being like, let's go back to my place, and then just drives around,
doing the loop,
does the little circle, and then pulls back in. It's like, this is my place. Love that. I probably would not. I definitely didn't appreciate it nearly as much like at the time or in previous viewings, but I love the knife fight between him and Demetrios in this incredibly crowded exhibit where both of them are basically fighting
creepy ass
the man, but like fighting more so to not make a scene and do this entire thing surrounded by people, but stealthily and like win this fight. And there's it also was like, man, that bodies exhibit was everywhere for like a moment in time. Like I remember that being all over the place here at the Arizona Science Center during this era of things. So seeing that is like a flashback.
It's very interesting to think of that knife fight, because I don't know that I've seen anything really like it before. But it's funny to see that evolve into the gunfight in John Wick 2, where they're like Keanu Reeves and Common are shooting each other with silenced pistols in a train station,
a mall kind of thing. Yeah, it's
or something like that. Somebody's upstairs, somebody's downstairs. There's a bunch of people just living their life in a train station, and they're firing weapons at each other, but for sneaksies.
Yeah, that's a really good actually comparison, Jared. Yeah, it is very much like John Wick was like, what if we just take this up to 11 energy to it?
Remember that knife scene? What if we just didn't explain why nobody notices this is happening?
Exactly right. Yeah, there's silence. No one can hear or see them. It's the same thing, right? Yeah,
Right.
like it's very good. And that knife fight is great. And Bond killing Demetrius and then like putting his body down, sort of as an echo to like Bond in like Thunderball, where like he puts like the like body down. Except for like here, it's like.
He doesn't make a quip to anybody
Doesn't
to
make
like
a
draw
quip
attention
to like a
to
table
it.
people. He just put a dead body on. He just like.
But
puts it down
in and of
walks
itself,
away.
it is its own quip because it's kind of a silly situation.
Yeah.
That he doesn't smirk too, because he just like had to fight for his life, and he doesn't find it very silly. But he is kind of just sit a dude down in the middle of a museum, but he's like dead. But he's kind of sit up like Weekend at Bernie's style.
Yeah.
It's still kind of like there's a dark comical element to the finish of that fight.
Yeah, for sure. But like that's a great shout out, Trevor. That's a great, I think, knife fight sequence. And one that's like much more intimate than the parkour sequence you had, before it. And I think it also ties well into maybe my favorite fight of the entire movie, which is him in the stairwell with the two like African like warlord dudes. I had always remembered him fighting like both throughout the stairwell, but like the fact that he just like fucking kicks off the first guy immediately down the entire fucking stairs, and he's just fighting the guy with like the machete.
That's why that guy doesn't have a name. Yeah.
And
he
how
he's just a
great that
bodyguard.
sequence is so good. Like how brutal and how that to me is like the most Jason Bourne of like any moment of the entire movie. I think, like just fighting down the stairwell, like getting beaten up, like kicked back down the stairs. Guys like flying at him, and like Vesper the entire time just like panicked for her life. She's trying to get the hell out of this like tornado she stepped into. I think it is so good, and probably the most like brutal Bond kill with him like choking out the guy. Very Last of Us energy to it. The guy like clawing at the dude's arms. Like it is certainly the most brutal Bond death in decades at the very least, right? Like it is such a great fight, like choreographed sequence, I think.
Yeah.
It's also like one of those 0 to 100 moments, kind of like with the knife fight. The knife fight still had kind of like they saw each other, they knew each other were there. Kind of like they knew at some point they had to meet and finish this. So there was kind of like a sense of build up to what would become the fight. In this, it was like he opened the door and here's a machete, and they're like, oh no,
Right.
and that he is ready to do whatever, wherever is kind of. This is like the third example of like this Bond is really into something here. He's like, and he's like thrives in these moments.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the moments where he has to plan anything, but if he has to react immediately and sort of viscerally and on instinct, that's where he can be counted on.
Yeah. I mean, it's the entire thing is instinct, because like they go up to that floor to like kind of scope out Lashif, not knowing that Warlord guy is going to be there trying to kill Lashif, and they duck out, and like in the last moment, like Bond, puts Vesper up and they're trying to like have a cover of making out in the stairwell or whatever, but the guy sees like the earpiece, and that's when everything pops off, and Bond immediately turns on the dime, like subterfuge didn't work, now we're going this. But it's not like that's not even a guy he was there to fight or anything. That's just complete surprise. And now he's in the midst of this and has to deal with this guy that was trying to kill his actual target. It's like, man, if he hadn't interfered at all, like these guys could have taken out Lashif. Admittedly, they don't want Lashif taken out at that point.
Yeah, they just want the money.
Yeah,
but it doesn't really occur to him until like maybe after. But like this is also in the place he has to be at for the next couple of days. Like they can't just leave actually, or the mission's screwed. And you can't really screw this mission because otherwise that money definitely finances terrorism.
And I love that. He goes, cleans himself up. And then Lashif has the gall to call out him for wearing a new shirt at the table. It's like, because I just helped kind of save your ass, dude.
Right, yeah.
Like, I just took out one of your problems. We're not going to get into that, but that's what happened. I thought that was cool.
Love that you just kind of touched on Trevor. I love the sequence directly after the fight where it's him in the bathroom, right? Like him, like, grabbing like the scotch, right, and like drinking as he like dabs like the blood, right, and cleans himself up. And one of the things I noticed this time around too is that like he like puts a bandage on his chest, and like that's there for like so much of the rest of the movie, right? Like when he
still there when he's being tortured,
it's there when he's being tortured. Like it's just there for like the rest of the movie, and like I think it feeds into just like this kind of like really going for like this sense of like realism throughout the film. Like that is still there. He'd still be bleeding from a fucking machete to the chest, right? Like it is such a cool moment because we don't get a lot of Bond after fights, right? Like typically after like a brutal fight in a Bond movie, it like just cuts to like him doing something cool now, right? Like him like, off to like the next thing, and like here like it like really slows down and like savors the moments of like Bond being beat to shit, right? And like really what would that look like in the immediate aftermath of that fight for Bond, and like him doing all this stuff. And then like we even get it from Vesper's end a little bit later, like her sitting in the shower, right? Like, yeah, what would that look like to someone who has never seen a man strangled to death with her bare hands before? Like that's a, you know, a traumatic event to say the least, right? And so like,
and not even just the man being strangled, but the man doing the strangling. Like they showed a train car at this point. They were getting pretty cozy, and like I don't know, she maybe assumed that this dude was capable of like shooting a guy because he's an enemy of the state or whatever, and it would never look that way. But like, not only would it look that way, but this guy is like capable of making it that way. Mm-hmm. And maybe even wants it to be that way.
Yeah. Like, I think Casino Royale really leans into the idea that at this point in Bond's career, because I think it changes from, like, Skyfall onwards, like, he is a weapon. Like, he is just sort of like a weapon he can't really plan out anything yet. And I think you see it a lot in the next movie where he is just fucking no plan, all mayhem, right? And, like, he's just sort of a weapon. He's a tool. And this, to your point, Jed, like I think is when he feels the most like himself a little bit, right? Like there's almost a little bit of like that argument of like, is Bruce Wayne the real Bruce Wayne, or is Batman the real Bruce Wayne kind of thing? And like I think at this point in Bond's career, like the real Bond is when he's just fighting and just like going off in his life and like can just kind of block out everything else going on.
Yeah, the suit isn't the mask in this situation. The violence is.
Right.
And the weapon is just a means to an end.
Yes. Yeah.
And this guy doesn't even, I'm not sure he's like very aware of that either.
Oh, at this point, no, I don't think at all. Yeah.
Because he even when he's recovering from it, like you said, he's in the room. It's like very chaotic, but he looks a mess, but he's acting, you know, he's getting all the things that he needs to get back in shape. He needs to get the sweat off him. He needs to change his shirt. He also needs a scotch. Once all those things are in together, he'll be fine, but he has to get there first.
Yeah. I think that's what, you know, so much of Skyfall obviously is about like Bond reinventing himself after, you know, spoiler, dying, right, in that movie's beginning. And I think that is sort of like the break I have for like when that character becomes a much more nuanced character. But like here it is all just like going off of like instinct. And yeah, I mean, it happens again, obviously, with being poisoned in the defibrillator sequence, right? And like him grabbing like the water and the salt, like try to like make himself throw up so he gets poison in his system. Him like look like shit afterwards, right? And then just like put on a new shirt and being like, sorry, that hand nearly killed me kind of thing. Just very flippantly being like, and that's done. Where like I don't linger on that. I'm on to the next thing now because I'm gonna have a short lifespan. That's what 00 agents do, right? And so
he lives for the moment, but also the win. He gets to come back and see Lashiv's face when this thing didn't work.
Right. Yeah.
And that's really what he wanted.
Yeah.
Winning also, but like what he really wanted was to let Lashiv know he can't kill him that way. He's gonna have to kill him the hard way.
Back to like Vesper's handling of the aftermath. I want to touch on that because there's a weird little element of that scene of like Bond gets himself cleaned up, goes back to the table, and then it cuts to Bond going back and like checking in on Vesper. And it's like, but you were just back at the table. Like I feel like that could have maybe been done in a different order.
They could have did,
but still, taking that aside, I love the scene of Vesper there, like trying to recover from all this. And I love seeing in the trivia the idea that like originally it was pitched that she was in her underwear or something, and like Daniel Craig and others were like, there's no way with the trauma she's experienced she would have taken her dress off to like get in the shower and go through that.
Who was that for? Because it wouldn't be for her.
Exactly. Yeah. So I love that it is like, no, she's just fully in there having a Lady Macbeth, like I can't get the blood off my hands moment. And it's a very like beautiful scene of like Bond trying to help her through that. in that moment. And so yeah, that's one of the standout scenes for me of this movie is the two of them. Also, circling back, we skipped over it, but I want to give a shout out to, as they're like establishing their cover or whatever, Bond being like, yeah, I'm Arlington Beach and you're Stephanie Broadchest, as just like a perfect nod to the terrible names they would have given her in previous movies and stuff.
What, you don't like Holly Goodhead?
yeah, exactly. So I love that, and just her immediately like, nope, we're not doing that, and Bond also being like, yeah, I'm not gonna be Mr. Beach either. That's also very stupid. So, so yeah, I'm just gonna be Bond. He already knows I'm Bond. So
yeah,
no point.
I'm literally here to do the thing, not to pretend I'm not doing the thing, because he already knows I'm here to do the thing.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, I love just sort of this movie's way that it. Lashif and Bond know from like the first second they meet each other, like, that's the bad guy, I'm the good guy, I'm here to stop you, let's play our game and do our thing and see who wins kind of thing. Like, there's no sort of like trying to hide it from one another. They each know what they're here for and what the other one's trying to do. And like,
yeah, I think there's a level of like these spy movies where you have to recognize that, like, when you talk about intelligence is such a low bar, or like maybe like a samey bar that many like different warring intelligent factions have, that like there's a whole lot of shared information in the intelligence community that, especially if we're talking about like a modern or like a Ben's modern, like it would be very difficult for someone like Bond, who exists as the international agent of the Crown, to just do so without ever, and no one ever seeing him, no one ever knowing no one's ever seeing his face.
It's not even that. It's like he like the Demetrius's wife knew exactly who he was and what he was looking for, and so when M says like, could she identify you, did she know, and Bond says no, it's like, no, she said hi James, and Bond directly asked about ellipsis. So like that is all the information that Lashif needed to get out of her to know that Bond is the guy that
all the information Bond had.
Yeah.
It's at that point.
Yeah.
Like, all I knew about was a phone named Ellipses and Demetrios.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we get to the like final foursome all-in scene, which is a great sequence.
Also, shout out to obviously the introduction of Jeffrey Wright there by like and offering to buy Bond back in, because like they realize that he's the one that can actually beat this guy.
Yes. Not
us in the CIA, and Jeffrey Wright, just being a great little introduction.
And the CIA way more willing to waste money to
exactly
fight terrorism.
That's a great line too, right?
Yeah. This was the W. Bush era, so yeah.
Any era. It was very funny though, where like I watched that movie and last night Trevor looked at me and was like, is the CIA richer than MI6? And was like, just America in general has way more money than England.
We used to live in the country with the Federal Reserve that makes the dollar. So
yeah, we're out here trying to fucking like build like spaceships and shit. They're trying to like offload colonies, and we're in a bit of a different boat here. I think like it's not the same. Yeah, very different dynamic here. And so like I always I think Jeffrey Wright is so good as Felix Leiter, right? Like I think all of his appearances across the series, I think he's like a fantastic Felix Leiter, and I love how good his chemistry with Daniel Craig is almost from the off.
Another great sort of off casting from the original Leiter, who that is almost better this way. It wouldn't, not that I'm sure you could have found there are plenty of people in 2005, 2004, 2006 that would probably been fine Leiters, but to assume Jeffrey Wright couldn't be because he's not like a tall Polish guy is silly. And I'm glad he got an opportunity to be that, because he did exactly what he needed, especially here. I think this is probably the best Leiter. I mean, in the last movie, he gets way more to do.
I also like him in Quantum as well. I think he's got like
he got a lot more to do in Quantum as well. Like when he gets to run around like one of the bros, then it works for him. But shout out to Felix Leiter and Jeffrey Wright, who I just saw the Batman, and shout out to Jeffrey Wright.
Yeah, I love Felix. Again, in the written reviews I've been doing, I've had a recurrent segment of like Felix Watch, of like ranking the Felix Leiters. I think Jeffrey Wright is like so many leagues ahead of all of them, with maybe the exception of like David Hedison, who at least gets to do it twice, or like Jack Lord in the first one, but like he's so much better than a lot of those just like random dudes that just found off the street who they had
Right.
feel excited to like deliver 3 lines. And yeah, I think he's fantastic, and it's fun to see him become part of like the like Bond canon over the Daniel Craig era as well, and like that relationship kind of continue to evolve.
It's really cool to see that they appreciate this Bond, and I mean it's not the first time like that the actor is the canon basically, and this guy has a lineage across these movies, and his relationships stay across these movies. Which I guess is really the first time. I mean, Brosnan's with M had that there's a relationship there too, but
Jack
to
Wade,
watch
never forget.
to watch Daniel Craig's Bond have relationships with these characters who return as those characters played by the same people over the course of like a 15-year series is fun to see.
It's really neat. Trevor, do you have any final things you want to run over for Casino Royale?
I mean, we haven't touched on the ending of the film really. The
most important part of Casino Royale. You mean?
the poker part. Like I've always been, ever since the movie Maverick, I've been a sucker for that that final poker scene of everybody has a winning hand, but it just kind of gets increasing. Like I'm a sucker for that kind of like reveal, and so we get that in this. So I love that.
Feel bad for the first guy who went all in, who by the time he was like, "Oh, this will make everyone fold," and was like, "Fuck, that really didn't work."
I had because he has a flush. Next guy has a full house. Lashif has a higher full house, and Bond has a fucking straight flush.
Straight flush, yeah.
I saw a great thing about it. I forget what it was on. Maybe it was a YouTube thing, but it was about why do all these magic hands why are they always the most fucking ridiculous hand?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because, someone could win with like a 3 of a kind, but that's still kind of a high odd. If the person you needs to win to save the world wins with a 3 of a kind, yes, he still wins, but the pressure's still there. So why not just make it a straight flush?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Just make it go all out. Like the one thing I watched this like a week and a half ago, and then I watched it again last night. And as I was like taking the notes last night, I had already forgotten that Lachif only has like a higher full house. I saw the 2 aces on the table, and I thought he had both aces and was going to pull out a full or like a 4 of a kind, 4 aces, and then Bond was going to beat him with the straight flush. And so I was like, oh no, he just has the better, full house.
Full house.
It's funny that you said that because I had always remembered that Bond had like the best hand you can get a hold of, which is a royal flush, and here it's just like, oh, a straight flush. Like, he's like, okay, yeah. Like,
but even then, then it's funny then to think about like they went ridiculous by giving him a flush, but they didn't go as ridiculous as they could have gone.
Gone, right?
Well, it's like because if you do that, it is just the exact scene from Maverick. If you go that route, you're just replacing that scene. So I appreciate that. Like, it's not a straight royal flush kind of thing, but it is still it is, and he has it. The cool thing in this is like realizing he has it at the turn, and so like Bond is just like he knows he can't be beat at that point, and it's fun kind of like seeing him psychologically play that out. So I love that, but then also we get the great torture scene, and then Lashif is just taken out of the running, and we still have half an hour of this movie to go, and like it's not that there's a big bad at that point anymore. That's something you and I have talked a lot on this series of like killing the enemies in the right order or whatever, and this one was like there isn't like a henchman that is doing any kind of follow-up stuff. It is Vesper isn't is keeping some things close to the chest, and still needs to get out. Oh, also shout out to Bond. Absolutely did not type Vesper in as the password.
No, he's just like boop, 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 boop.
Yeah. Like you look and see the keys he is punching, and nope, there's like one of those keys does not fit at all within Vesper as the password. But whatever.
Daniel Craig's an actor.
Yeah. But yeah, like I love the denouement of the film, really, of like figuring out what's still going on, and the like when M calls and is like, okay, well, we'll talk about your resignation, that's fine, I like we'll deal with that, but also where's the money? And Bond realizing what's going on and chasing and then getting like basically one last action sequence and
an action
and
sequence
the
that is
heartbreak.
very Quantum of Solace, I would say. Bond just destroying an entire building. That's very the sequel. It's just like no regard for any sort of life. Yeah, that's very much what's going to happen next.
Or history or the environment. Like,
just
I'm going to sink a
yeah.
building in Venice. Like, fuck this.
I mean, he is looking for a briefcase with $150 million, or theoretically 149,500,000 because he tips the dealer $500,000.
Yeah, he goes crazy. That dealer made out.
Yeah, and like I was as I was watching that, I was like, I wonder if they took that out of his deposit, or are they still going to just give him $150 million and the dealer just has a red chip,
a free I mean, I think the action sequence and like the collapse in Venice building is like great, right? Like it is a really brutal, like kind of kinetic, frantic sequence. And then I think the sequences between Bond and Vesper, again, with no dialogue really, because it's just underwater, and like how much emotion they can convey in like a like wordless underwater sequence and goodbye, and like the way she grabs his like hands and puts it on his face, like to feel it one more time, right? Like I think it is such a beautiful, like emotionally satisfying like conclusion, right? Because like as much as I think we each liked Bond and Tracy's final scene together in On Her Majesty's Good Service, right? And like how like devastating that is. This one gives you more time to like allow things to breathe, right? Whereas like Tracy dies and that movie ends, and then we're just never really gonna go back to that again. Whereas here it's like, she's gonna die, and there's still gonna be like 6-7 minutes of movie left, so for like that to kind of linger, Bond to have his conversation with M, right, and call Vesper the bitch that like she deserved it kind of thing, and then like M very much calling him out on that immediately and being like,
and being like, bitch, do you
think why you're alive is just for pure luck, right? Like it's because she made a deal, and like she probably hoped that she would live but knew that she wouldn't, kind of thing, right? And like immediately gut checking him there, right? Like I loved that sequence almost as much as like Bond just like cradling her body and just like rocking. Like the look on Daniel Craig's face, I think, is so perfectly active, just like utter grief and like not being able to process thing, and then like turn into anger, and then like the final sequence in Italy with Mr. White is just absolutely perfect. It's just like a perfect Bond sequence, and like such a great first delivery of James Bond,
especially when realizing that like that's the guy that saved Bond from Le Chiffre. So like the fact that he has no problem taking him back out,
no love at all.
But like also just I want to circle back to like when we started doing this, the scene I instinctively thought of with Casino Royale was the like torture scene of Bond with the chair with no bottom thing. And I was like, that was a thing that like definitely stuck with me from this movie from 16 years ago. And it's
funny that it never really gets bigger than that. Like,
yeah,
it tries. Like there's moments in, I think Spectre tries to do something crazy with like torture or whatever.
Drill thing,
But I mean, there's not really anything in Skyfall, but like, there's nothing as sinister, really.
Yeah,
I think
as that.
Le Chiffre is totally accurate about it. Like, it's just like this. Like, why get like complicated and over the top and be like absurdist? I don't need a laser. Like, I'll just do the most damage I can do to a man and like keep it simple.
Yeah, I think the other element that that I think of in this kind of vein is going to be in Skyfall, and it's like the long walk towards towards Daniel Craig, like that Javier Bardem has, like that is another like iconic kind of like showdown between the two characters. But yeah, it's a very different. Exactly, it's a there's a tension there that's not being done through like physical violence and stuff. But yeah, I appreciate that. It's a little Deus Ex Machina for my taste, but it's still like I appreciate that like he was always just the accountant, the money guy, and so I appreciate that like the bigger organization has a problem with the fact that he's been kind of running these deals on the side, trying to pick up some extra money with the money that they've bestowed upon him. And so yeah, I love that, like, yeah, he's taken out because of that, not because of because of Bond. Bond was just like an ancillary thing in this. So yeah, I thought that was just a terrifying sequence, certainly like at the time, and
it's.
And I love that per my quote at the beginning, I love that like Bond isn't going to like Bond knows the end game for Le Chiffre, and Bond gains nothing by giving him that information, so why do it?
Right. I think it's interesting because the in the book something similar to this happens, and Spectre comes and sort of takes Le Chiffre, but they don't just leave Bond. They do ultimately, but there's a conversation about like, should we? Like, he's here, we know who he works for. We could just like kill him now and like get him out of the way, but instead they brand him as like a warning, and that's what like draws him to Spectre afterwards. It's interesting how they row the boat in the movies to get Bond to start chasing Spectre, which is like he's upset at Mr. White because Mr. White was involved in the Vesper situation, but he really doesn't hear the word Spectre until like the next movie maybe.
No, it's Quantum still, right? That's the thing. They didn't have the rights to Spectre yet, so it was Quantum. That's like also the problem, right? Like they didn't own the rights yet, so they had to make it Quantum, and like, oh, like we can't do Spectre, we'll do some terribly named like other organization, and then oh wait, we have the rights to Spectre now. Well then, forget Quantum.
Forget Quantum.
Now it's Spectre. Yeah,
just redo Quantum.
Yeah,
let's redo it way worse.
Quantum was just one of our subsidiaries. Welcome to like, Spectre.
That's sort of the problem with like the Craig era a little bit, is that like they were just kind of like, oh, like we have a better idea, let's just like change it up again, and like, oh, we have a better idea, let's do something different. Like they didn't like that like long term plan maybe wasn't there. But
I think the problem was it was there in Sky, and it was supposed to end at Skyfall, and then
very obviously
MGM was like, all right, but
that made $1 billion at the box office. Yeah,
Daniel, I know you don't want to come back, you've been very vocal about not coming back, but I have this vault of money. We can add more money to it,
all the money you want. Yeah, it's like, it's all right, fair enough, right? Like, it made $1 billion.
And he got to the point where he didn't even care what the script said. He was like, whatever, this movie probably sucks, but I'm going to get a whole lot of money doing it, so let's get it.
We're going to speed things up a little bit, because I have a movie to go see. But, let's run through Villain Corner. Trevor and Jarrett, how'd y'all like Le Chiffre?
Love Le Chiffre, love Mads Mikkelsen's performance.
Yeah.
I liked the personal relationship between him and Alec more, or between Bond and Alec more. So, but Mads Mikkelsen, it takes the number 2 spot for me if we're doing the ranking.
Who do we have number 2? Franz Sanchez. I would probably put him, because I also like, I think the like personal nature of Bond and Sanchez and License to Kill, and like what that vendetta is for, right? And like, and how much we get of them together, right? The fact that Sanchez is kind of given an entire movie, right? That he's there from like the pre-title sequence to the end.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of Bond and Le Chiffre together too, obviously, at the poker table. Like the whole second act is the two of them just facing off entirely. But
I think they never really knew each other outside of like the scope of this particular game. They just kind of expected each other and then got exactly what they were looking for in the 4 hours he spent together or whatever.
One of the things I like about our Villains Corner we talk about, I think weekly now, is the fact that our list is our combination of me and Trevor's rankings, right? So like it's different than mine would look, right? Because like I would put Le Chiffre below Goldfinger for sure, who is 3rd, but ahead of Onatop. And also, I'm just going to remind us right now, we have to also rank Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, because we didn't do that from Diamonds Are Forever like 14 weeks ago. So there's also that. But I would say Le Chiffre is number 4 for me, ahead of Onatop, but below Goldfinger, Sanchez, and Trevelyan.
That's fine.
In terms of Wint and Kidd, Trev, how fantastic are these characters? We love them.
I mean, they're great, and we keep like calling back to them to the point that we were like, wait, we never actually added, we never ranked them in our Villains Corner. So I wanna maybe throw them just below Onatop. I think Onatop is an evolution of them, effectively.
Yeah, I agree. I don't hate this, right? Like I think Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd are so much of the magic of Diamonds Are Forever, right? Like, which has such a Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of vibe to it. Literally for me and Trevor, because we saw it together in Phoenix, right? And so we just kind of did that. I think they're a fucking blast. And like the fact that like they're also weirdly like even 50 years almost, exactly 50 years after they came out, still one of the only like LGBTQ characters in the entire series, and the fact that like in 1971 they were actually treated totally seriously, and like there was no like joke made about that really. Like, I think they're great characters. I think they know exactly what movie they're in, and I think the fact that me and Trevor were like, this dude has such Crispin Glover energy, and then it was Crispin Glover's dad, makes it like, I totally agree. I'm totally down to put them right below On a Top. They are great. They're a ton of fun.
Yeah.
That takes us to those music moments. How'd you like Chris Cornell singing a Bond song? It is, I think, I like this one, I think. I like, the Daniel Craig ones have like some people are really kind of all over the map for them. I like Chris Cornell. I think it's a cool title sequence. I think it's a cool song. It's not going to like, I'm not going to hum it home later on. It's not Shirley Bassey, but it's a fun, like, nice change of pace from what the usual Bond themes are.
Yeah, I don't know. It felt like an iconic one for this.
Oh, Jarrett. Okay, yeah, defend it, Jarrett. What do you like about
I'll defend it, but I think you defend it in its time and its place. But I mean, obviously, everyone loves Skyfall. Like Adele kind of really rose a bar and kind of just threw it away. But I think, especially of the Craig movies, it's up there. Like the only bad one, in my opinion, is the next one, which is ironic because it has two very good. Like artists, and just they together just didn't really
weird.
Work for me. Yeah. But
I think this is my second favorite of Craig's. I'll say.
I think Chris Cornell, a character, his own sort of character, sort of lends a bit of a. I think there's an old white dude sort of like necessity here that puts Daniel Craig in a place. It puts this Bond in a place of like, it's not quite old, it's not quite Soundgarden. You're not wearing like it's not pocket chains and holes in your jeans, but he's always had this rich sort of voice that feels like the words mean more, even if the words are very simple or the words make no sense. Like most of Soundgarden is just writing of lyrics that don't make any sense, but the delivery and his voice kind of make them feel more like add more weight, more gravitas to all the entire situation. And I feel like there's a perfect sort of onboarding for a lot of mainstream mainstream comers to this new experience about to go on. Yeah. And Chris Cornell being something that sounds completely different to everybody else, to everybody from the series anyway. But for a voice if you were a particular sort of man in a particular sort of place will remember and sort of appreciate, that kind of really ties a bow on like a new Bond experience that I think Chris Cornell really set off here.
Jarrett made me like it more, so I put it above GoldenEye, but below Die Another Day, because Madonna's techno beat is rad, and I don't care what the haters say.
That's all I was gonna say. Is like it was not the banger of Die Another Day's Madonna beat.
So good.
I do love that they didn't force him to shoehorn and call the song Casino Royale.
Royale.
And it just ends up, it's more a meta thing of like because the song's like You Know My Name or something like that, and it obviously like James Bond is a very iconic and familiar name, so it's like meta commentary on that front. But other than that, it's like I'm not gonna remember this song come next week.
I like it. No Q Lab section because there's no Q. So that takes us, Trevor. Where do you rank Casino Royale on your list, and what are your final reviews, thoughts on it?
Love this. This is my new number one. GoldenEye has like a more nostalgic tint for me, but I think this is easily a better movie overall. And yeah, just had a grand old time with this one. I've been looking forward to like getting to this era, pretty much since the beginning of this. So yeah, and I'm very curious to see where we go, because yeah, I don't know what Quantum of Solace has in store next week.
Mm-hmm. Jarrett, final review and thoughts of Casino Royale.
I think it's the only Bond movie I like recommend to people.
Oh, that's not true for me. You don't recommend Skyfall?
No shit, no. Logan.
I don't recommend Skyfall because A, it's very long, and B, Skyfall is a great movie. I think it's a movie that I find great because I watched the other two. I don't think I think a person who doesn't know this series yet can't walk into Skyfall and appreciate it the same way. I think anyone
agree with
who watches
that, but I think
Casino
they would still
Royale would
enjoy
just
it.
appreciate Casino
That's
Royale. They
interesting.
might enjoy it, but it's up to them to kind of just want to. It's like I wouldn't introduce Iron Man 3 without
Iron Man 3 is the best
understanding
Iron
whether
Man
somebody
movie,
should have.
Yeah.
Right, it's probably the best movie, but I wouldn't want someone to start there.
That's a good point.
And Sam Mendes, great director in my opinion.
Oh yeah,
but
yeah, okay, I like that. I love Casino Royale. This is probably the most I've ever enjoyed the movie. I think it is rad. I think it is the second movie out of the 21 we've watched now that I think is just straight up like a 10 out of 10 masterpiece along with Goldfinger. I think it is just like almost a perfect movie, right? Like there's literally almost nothing I would change about Casino Royale. I think it's just fantastic. Like if anything, like I think the weakest link it would be like Le Chiffre, just because we don't get more of him, right? That's sort of my agreement. I watch out more of this fantastic character who's so good, or more of him, or all these different things. I think it has fantastic action set pieces. Vesper is, I think, pretty clearly, no disrespect to all the other female leads Bond has had, but like the best female Bond girl in the entire series, right? Like none of the ones that are going to come after her in the Craig era are going to come close. There aren't really even Bond girls in some ways other than like Madeline in the last two. And I think their dynamic is fantastic. I think it takes what made Bond and Tracy special and On Her Majesty's Secret Service and doesn't have Bond cheat on her like 7 times in the middle of the movie with random women. I just think it's such a good love story. I think it's such a good movie. I think it's such a good character. I think we didn't really talk on it too much, but like I think Daniel Craig's performance is fantastic. And yeah, he was rightfully nominated for a BAFTA. There was talk of him being nominated for an Oscar. Like he's so good in this movie. And I think it's just absolutely brilliant. Since I watched it last night, I've sort of gone back and forth on where I wanted to rank it. Because obviously I really loved Goldfinger watching it as well. Because I know another Craig movie coming down the line here, I will like a little bit more. I'm going to rank it number 2 just because I know another one's going to ultimately take my top spot.
What a hipster-ass thing to do.
That's what I'm going to do. But I think it's fantastic. I think Casino Royale is, again, I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's fantastic. Which leaves our top 5s looking pretty similar still. Trevor's new number 1 is, of course, Casino Royale, followed by GoldenEye, License to Kill, The Living Daylights, and Tomorrow Never Dies. It's a very good top 5. And my top 5 being Goldfinger, Casino Royale, GoldenEye, Live and Let Die, and The Living Daylights. Yeah, those are a bunch of good movies, I have to say. Bond on Bond we won't do. We'll wait until the end of Craig's run, but suffice it to say he's real good when he's good, and he's not so good when he's bad.
He's like from this alone, I would say like Craig surpasses everybody but maybe Dalton for me. Yeah.
I just think yeah, I'll be curious to see when you watch all 5, right? Like I think Craig, again, when I think Craig is good, I think he is better or as good as almost anyone, but yeah, he just has those downbeats too.
I mean, yeah, from what I've seen in this Skyfall and No Time to Die, like Craig is my number 1. So it's going to be a matter of if like Quantum of Solace and Spectre can bring him down enough to
versus like the perfect bad and average for Dalton for you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's the show. Thank you for watching. If you like what you heard, you can go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite, where you should already be on this YouTube exclusive series. Hit the like button, hit the little subscribe button, ring the bell to get notified when a new video goes live Mondays through Saturday over on thatnerdysite.com, and sometimes multiple videos in a day. You can also go over to thatnerdysite.com and find all the latest written content reviews, features over there, as well as the written companion piece to this series. You can go find Jarrett at Jarrett John on the internet. Jarrett, anything that you want to plug?
Last week I played a space shooter called Marauders for IGN.
I saw that.
It's like Tarkov in space, but really not really. It was a closed alpha. You probably couldn't play it now, but When it comes back, maybe try that because that game's okay. Turns out.
We love a good okay game here.
Mm-hmm.
You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Stokey on the internet. Trev, anything that you want to plug?
I will give a shout out to That D Plus Show.
Yes.
Time this episode's going out, we're probably doing stuff like Chippendale Rescue Rangers and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series will be coming up. So yeah, go check out whatever we're doing over on That D Plus Show.
Agreed. You can go find me at LeftyLogie at LeftyLoggy on the internet, LOGGY. I will echo Trevor's shout out to go check out That D Plus Show. It's a lot of fun. We just got done with the Pixar month when we record this. And like you said, we'll be getting ready to do Obi-Wan when this goes live. Go check out Jarrett's Marauders piece. It's real good. Game's okay. Who doesn't love to read a good okay game review? And then you can go check out That News You Care About, That Nerdy Site Show, and all the Let's Plays we have going live Tuesday, Thursday, and Cameron's continuing Friday night Dying Light 2 Let's Play series that he is doing that will finish in December. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site. For myself, for Trevor, for Jarrett, for all of us here, That Bond Show will return with Quantum of Solace.